So this unfolding, this flowering into the remembrance of the essential wholeness of being, the essential wholeness that is the natural, true essence nature of all beings. The actual unfolding is so far away from what the mind imagines that it is. That in truth, what the mind imagines it is some kind of escape from life, getting away from everything that feels hard into something, this mythic idea of enlightenment, which is just blissful, ecstatic, easy living. And on some level, there is a truth to this. But the truth to it is not the truth that the mind imagines. The truth is that the blissful, ecstatic, easy living is that the perspective of seeing shifts from the narrow, limited perspective of mind to the wide open, infinite perspective of the true essential being. But the mind and the me imagines that it gets us away from everything that the me doesn't like. And this is the catch. In truth, we open to the essence of being. We open to being the awareness. We open to the stillness, to the silence. And there's no doubt this is blissful. Simplicity, beauty, grace, indeed, to know the true essential nature. And then we wonder, why can I not just be here all the time? What is wrong? Something else needs to happen. And this doubting of the clear seeing of the being, the knowing of the being, can constantly come in because there are challenges that arise in life. But in truth, once we open to recognize the essential being, the naturalness, it never closes again, it never changes. But into this spaciousness, into this light, into this knowing starts to arise all of the companions that have been stuffed away during the life, right? And the mind imagines that there's something wrong happening. The mind imagines that something is not working here, that I'm doing something wrong, starts doubting the wisdom of the simple knowing of the being. Whereas in truth, everything that arises is arising because you are in the knowing of true nature. When you are in knowing of true nature, it is an invitation for everything that is discordant in the system, everything that is residual and holding the possibility of bringing a distraction, conditioning, resistance, and a sense, therefore, of separation. Everything has to give itself up, right? Everything has to give itself up and refine itself into the being. And so these companions that arise, these visitors that come, they are not an error. They are not because you are doing something wrong. They are coming because there is a readiness to receive these parts of yourself into the wholeness of being. Everything that arises that feels hard or challenging, that can bring up resistance, is not happening because what the mind imagines that something has gone wrong or you're not getting it. But it's so completely the opposite of that. And it's all about the perspective of seeing what is happening. If the perspective of seeing is limited as a me, it will make a problem out of the things that arise in life. When the perspective of seeing is the clear, open being, there's a natural receiving of all of life. Seeing, recognizing the flow of life, living itself, and a natural allowing of all that arises. The grace of this is that we start to recognize that if there is some kind of resistance or challenge or intensity arising, that somehow this is a graced messenger. It is surfacing to bring forward something that is ready to surface and come to freedom. God is here, the glory is here, the whole truth, the totality is right here. The only thing that keeps us from that is a belief that we are separate from it. And what creates the belief of being separate from God, the glory, the mother of all, the all-encompassing perfect love, is the belief. And the belief is created out of these patterns of consciousness that feel to be discordant. If there is anything in us that is triggered, it's not a problem. It's a graced gift to realize that there's something here that is acting as an obscuration. And glory be, let's bring it forward. Glory be, let's bring that obscuration into the light, into the remembering of wholeness. Right? If the pull of the heart, if the longing of the heart is to know this truth and live this truth all the way through, we have to realize that, in a way, any experiences of awakening are just the beginning, right? That is why we don't really focus on the idea of having an awakening, because it can create such a misconception for the mind that imagines, oh, now I'm awake. But no, you're not awake. Awakeness is here, and there's a direct experience of awakeness. You are awakeness. You're not someone that is awake. That's got to go, right? For awakeness to be known, the one that thinks that they're awake or that there's an awakening that belongs to anyone, that one has got to disappear into the awake field of light, right? Everything that creates a sense of separation and division has to disappear into the field of light. There can't be anything hanging on in order to truly know the glory of what we are in truth, the essential nature. Now, we already are this truth, right? We already are this glory. So there is a part of us that knows this. There's a remembering that is always here. And it is the remembering that creates the longing. In a way, the remembering is the longing. Because in truth, the remembering is the glory, is God's longing for you. You don't exist separate from God. You never have, and you never will. And so your longing is God's longing. And it's the sign that remembrance is already here. If you have a sense of longing, it's because you have an awareness of God's longing. Now, God isn't longing for you because there's a sense of you being separate from God, but because that longing is a momentum of life surrendering into itself, of wholeness, ever in surrender, perpetual surrender into itself as a resonant field of light that is constantly collapsing into itself. We could say in order to maintain the integral wholeness and never, ever divide in any way. The surrender has to be a perpetual motion. Now that perpetual motion in your heart feels like a longing, but essentially it's the divine light surrendering into itself, and it creates a momentum which is like a flow of attraction. And really all we are invited into is to jump into the river of the flow of attraction. Jump into the sense of longing, because to jump into the sense of longing is to jump into the sense of God's longing for you to remember that it is utterly impossible to be apart from God, the glory, that you never have been, you never will be, and it is a total impossibility. So in this impossibility, there's no one to get anything. There's no one to take ownership, right? There's no one to do anything here. It's all a divine movement, a completely impersonal divine movement. And part of this divine movement is that everything that feels to be discordant and divided has to come into the remembrance of wholeness. Everything has to. How could it be any other way, right? And it doesn't really matter what words we use. This is actually incredibly simple. And this is true spirituality. There can be all these ideas of spirituality that can be used as hiding places, lots of practices, lots of techniques, lots of things that give the mind ways of imagining that it's going to get something. But the truth is that the mind, let's say the consciousness, the mind consciousness is creating all of this complexity out of its belief that it's divided from God and that it needs complexity as some kind of penance, right? It's incredibly simple to know yourself. What is hard is to see through the complexity of all of the mind's ideas, of what this is all about, and what kind of penance or tapas that you have to move through in order to be worthy of God. But the truth is, you have never been divided from God, and it is just the story of the mind that you are separate from God that is acting as the obscuration. Right here in this moment, if somebody pulled a thread and just removed the tensile structure of conditioning, you would fall into a jelly and remember that you are God, right? That thread that is holding a sense of separation, that complexity of the mind's making, is acting as a barrier, a boundary, a protection, a defense to exactly what is longed for. It's acting as a defense to love. It's acting as a defense to knowing the oneness in the heart of God. And so, of course, in order for this tensile structure of the me to dissolve into surrendered remembrance, all of the holding blocks and foundations that is made of beliefs has to be let go of. That there's not a single belief that is true. It's impossible for the mind to imagine what that could possibly mean. It can only be known in direct experience, and so we are always pointing and inviting a direct experience of being the being. If we enter into what seems like the work of clearing the discordant, before we know the being, then we will just be moving in psychological realms and imagining a path of progress, right? So there's an incredible miraculous wisdom to this, that when we follow the wisdom of the flow of grace, that we actually flower, we could say scientifically, the true science. The true science is the true wisdom, the intelligence of the glory, of the great light, right? And when we allow the natural unfolding to happen, there's a graced intelligence that leads us exactly in a kind, gentle, comprehensive way to know the true nature, and then to move through all of the residual discordance in order to bring a sense of wholeness. And at the same time, the wisdom is so intricate that it performs an incredible balancing act, a harmonizing dance at every point to exactly balance out the imbalances that are present at every point in exact perfection, in order to cross every T and dot every I and not leave a stone unturned, so that the glory can be known and freedom can be lived. Nothing is out of place. We can say that a million times and the mind will never believe it. It is only when the direct experience outweighs the mind's belief that there's something wrong, if there are challenges arising, when the depth of the knowing of the being is stronger, then we have this capacity to stay open and allowing whatever is happening and receive the grace and meet the residues. Now, when this balance, this tipping of the balance happens, it's an indication of maturity. And then what happens is that more of the residues come forward, right? And in a way, it's like a test. Will the mind go into the reactive idea that something's wrong? It will certainly bring up old stresses, but there's now a capacity to meet the stress, a willingness to meet the stress, a recognizing on a certain level that it's not personal, and a recognizing that whatever is happening is somehow happening as a flow of grace, even if it's not known all the way through. Where it is known is deep enough to hold the clarity of being and an undisturbed peace in the being that allows all of these residual places of discordance to come forward into wholeness. Now the nervous system will only let go into safety, right? So if we work within psychological functioning to try to remove trauma, of course there will be benefits. Of course there will be benefits, but it will only go so far. There will still be a me that has moved through a psychological process or somatic experience, experiencing whatever process is used, but there'll still be a me that feels to be separate, right? So there's this comprehensive, natural way of this all unfolding, which is about following the wisdom of life and being here now, and recognizing the grace as it comes in. And of course, when we are ready, we, consciousness, create exactly the guidance, companionship, and situation in appearance for everything that needs to unfold. And what we mean by that is everything, the whole life, all of the characters, all of the players. We create exactly what is needed. Essentially, we're really being invited to see through the whole story, to see through the whole story in order to know who you are without a story, without a narrative, to not be accountable to the mind's ideas, beliefs, and conditionings, but to be a point of light and resonant living freedom, to be deep in the knowing of this truth as this truth. And in order for this to happen, we have to come to the remembrance of our essential innocence and essential goodness. The human condition is a deeply held belief of somehow having done something wrong, having something wrong with me, or that someone has done something wrong, right? Or a combination of these. And an imagining that you have lost something, that you lost your innocence, you lost your purity and your oneness with God in the process. And this unfolding has to bring forward all of the places that are holding those core beliefs in order to reveal that you are not separate, never have been separate, and that your innocence and purity, divinity is completely intact and has never ever been compromised or disturbed in any way. And whatever the mind imagines and believes is the great understanding that creates a sense of separation and division, limitation, and the sense of the personal, the me and the mine. And so this whole unfolding is about seeing through the great misunderstanding and coming to remember so wholly and holistically the great glorious truth of who you are, and that it is completely natural, ordinary, and simple to be yourself, way more so than the mind could even begin to imagine. So many times it is spoken in this unfolding, oh, it's so simple. I keep forgetting how simple it is. It's so simple, right? And that is because it is so simple. And yet the learned, conditioned strategy is to be very complicated and complex, right? So just being here, as these words come, it's not so much about understanding what the words are speaking of. It's about what they are pointing to, and the remembrance and the receiving of the pointing happens in your consciousness, in the one field of consciousness. So it is the resonance of recognition that is the alive truth here in this moment, the alive presence here. The sense of your alive presence opens to the field of alive presence. But alive presence is everywhere. And as these words come, it is a natural attunement that happens. It's not someone that gets something or attunes. It's actually the relaxation of the mind and the attunement of consciousness to a finer frequency of itself in order to remember and attune to this remembrance. Attune to, we could say, the sense of the longing for God, which is God's longing for you. That attuning to that longing is to attune to the perpetual surrender that is the flow of life, to just attune to the stillness, the silence, the flow of the knowing, the longing, however it feels true for you. attune, right? Attuning to the felt sense of your naturalness, of being yourself, of being right here, right now, simple, open, natural, and free. Whether it is the stillness and the silence of presence, the sense of just being here, or the I am presence that brings you here to the remembering, or whether it is the felt sense of the longing of the heart, it does not matter, because they are all vehicles. Every pointing is like a vehicle that you might jump in, like a taxi, to bring you to yourself, right? So if it doesn't resonate, don't get fixated in the mind trying to work out why it doesn't resonate. Why are you not getting it? Let it go. Let it go. Just be here. And at some point, the resonance, the frequency of what is speaking will attune to be recognized by what is listening and realize it's the same. Right? What is speaking and what is listening is the same. Consciousness, it's one consciousness, hearing itself, speaking to itself, listening to itself, receiving itself, attuning to itself, remembering itself, resonating more finely as itself, right? Speaking to itself, bringing the alive remembrance of itself, listening, receiving, opening, deepening, resonating at a finer frequency in the knowing of itself. And this is like the flow of surrender, right? The surrender happens where the sense of the mind consciousness that feels to be personal surrenders naturally, without you even knowing about it, into the pure consciousness, into the flow. You don't know about it necessarily, but you start to feel more of an attuned remembrance and recognition, because this is not someone's happening. It's not someone's event. It's not someone's satsang. It's all about consciousness. Consciousness, the one field of consciousness that is here, calling itself to itself. And the intelligence knows how, and it's all happening in the unseen. So it doesn't matter what the mind thinks is happening here. It's so beyond the mind's understanding. And yet at a certain point, as consciousness recognizes itself, remembers itself, and resonates in remembrance, the mind consciousness subtly releases its denser frequency of holding pattern into a finer frequency. And you start to feel that you are the consciousness that is resonating. And there starts to be a sense of a deeper recognition of everything that's being spoken, a deeper sense of peace and stillness and openness that is the natural, true essence nature that is always here, right? So this is not about just resting in awareness and knowing yourself as awareness and being the witness and imagining that that's the end of the road, that the goal is to be the witness, to be the aware witness, and that's it, you've completed your awakening. Not even slightly is that true. It's not even the full first opening, right? It's that this grace of being the witness, being the awareness and recognizing this is the first opening that is starting to give the possibility of awareness actually recognizing itself. Now, the sense of the first, what gets called the first true awakening, we could say, if we want to use that language, is when awareness is completely awake and aware of itself, and the knowing of itself is so full, consciously awake and knowing that the felt sense of what you are is a knowing that you're not the person, you're not the mind body, that your perspective of seeing is like an infinite open field that knows itself everywhere. You cannot find yourself at the point of the me, because the sense of what you are has released its singular point in surrender to the whole field. Now it's possible to taste this and to imagine that it closes again. It doesn't ever close again. It just gets obscured by the habit to go to the mind. But if this perspective of seeing opens, this is still just the start, right? So in order for the true intelligence, the true science, let's say, of this whole unfolding, which is the natural evolution of consciousness that is in a process, an intelligent process within itself to remember its divinity, its fullness all the way through, we have to have the guidance and grace of the big picture, right? Otherwise, we're going to get stuck somewhere in the opening and feel kind of stuck, stagnant, like, am I there? Like doubt will come in. Why am I not getting it? What's going on? All of this kind of stuff is going to happen because the mind is going to come and take root again, because the evolutionary impulse of consciousness is not being recognized, right? And exactly for what we spoke of as at the beginning here, this is why, we're going to say it again, this is why, is because part of the evolution is, part of the refinement, the essential part of refinement is that all of these challenging places come up. And if we don't recognize that all that is challenging that is coming up is the refinement process, is grace, and we're not guided to keep on keeping on, we're going to imagine that we're stuck back in the mind, and we're going to keep chasing an idea of an awakening experience that feels like some kind of high, because we're not realizing the grace of the whole unfolding includes everything that's happening and is not about some kind of high moment and trying to maintain a blissful opening experience. It's about the integration of that into a depthful knowing that the true being never moves and changes, never is disturbed by anything that is happening. And this allows all that is happening in the play of life to happen and not be a distraction away, but to be recognized as grace itself, refining. We could say purifying, but the mind can imagine what purifying is, whereas what purifying really is honing the ability to receive and allow everything as your true essential nature, as the true being, right? And this is why we need continual support and pointings, because it's so easy to get lost in the woods, in the jungle of the mind that is looking for what it imagines my awakening is. And within the collective consciousness, often the challenges of this rarefied unfolding are not spoken about, because there's this great idea in the mind that awakening is some kind of high and blissful experience. And so the me that speaks about my awakening experience only speaks about the good parts of it and skims over the challenges, and then gives the collective impression that it's all about the highs and completely ignores the fact that, you know, there's moments of resistance, there's moments of anger, there's moments of sadness, because until all of the holding patterns that are like patterns of hurt, anger, sadness, stress, all the old stress patterns, until they have released into the being, until they have come home to the remembering of innocence, the felt sense of your lived experience, the awakening that's in process, we could say, if we want to call it like that, it doesn't feel whole because it's not fully cooked, right? Sometimes it gets spoken of as being halfway up the mountain or an eighth of the way up the mountain, right? It's not to even measure where you are on the mountain, because glory be, at the top of the mountain, there's no question, right? And no thought about the mountain or where you are, right? It's not about the journey. It's not about the path, and it's not about arriving. It's not about meeting some kind of expectations. It's not about what the mind thinks it's about. It's all happening in the unseen. If your life is a complete catastrophe and a total mess, the chances are that you're onto something, right? The chances are that this life holds the possibility of actually realizing and going all the way through, right? But if you get caught in the mind's ideas, oh, I should be blissful, I should be here, this is what should be happening, then that itself is the distraction, right? The stresses and all of the things that are happening are the freeing of the suppressed, repressed, unconscious shadowlands, right? And we have to allow the shadowlands to be illuminated by the light of the being for this wholeness to be lived in the knowing of its wholeness, right? So there's a natural intelligence that is carrying all of this. And let's say the essential message in this moment is to invite the recognition that when stresses and challenges arise in life, it's the glory, not a disaster. It's the mind that judges, because the mind has an idea of wanting pleasure and goodness, and for the me to feel happy, for the ego sense to feel happy and peaceful in its understanding. But true peace is the knowing of your essential nature, the essential being, and to be able to maintain that peace whatever happens. And in the unfolding and the refinement, there's going to be so many tests of being able to recognize that the peace is still here while you meet things that feel very intense, and have the ability to welcome and receive whatever comes forward, because the releasing of the suppressed, unconscious conditionings and protections is an absolutely essential part of this unfolding for wholeness to be known. Particularly if there have been known traumas. Now, everyone has some conditioning protections, and they come forward in their own way naturally when there's a readiness for these places to come forward. They come forward when there's an ability to truly receive them and hold them, right? Of course, what we can recognize is that in the life, things have come forward, and we've moved in protective ways to the best of our ability to manage the repeating karmas. But what we're speaking of here is not managing the repeated karmas by suppressing, numbing, and using strategies. We're speaking about recognizing what life is at a deeper level that allows the fullness and grace of life to live itself and to meet itself all the way through, and to free the sense of mind consciousness and protection and holding into this remembrance of freedom, of peace, of being life flowing within itself. Life flowing within itself is the flow of perpetual surrender. It's absolutely the same as the integral wholeness flowing in surrender into itself. It's just at a slightly different frequency, right? So it's always the same momentum, but just different frequencies that we are open to. So the unfolding is about refining the frequency that our nervous system is resonating at. And this translates to refining the frequency that the consciousness is resonating at, that we move from the denser frequency of mind consciousness, body consciousness, to refine into a cosmic universal consciousness where the felt sense is, I am everywhere, to refine into a finer frequency of the unified field of consciousness that is the Atman. And this process of refinement is an incredibly profound process of opening to find that you are everything through your direct experience of swallowing, consuming everything that feels unpalatable, digesting it through your nervous system as transmutation, and finding the oneness in your direct experience with absolutely everything, that there's nothing in your lived experience that you are apart from. So it can happen as the felt sense of being one seemingly with things. Flowers and trees and nature is an easy place. Can start to be one with your sensory experience. One of the more challenging parts is finding that you are one with your broken places, right? That the places that feel flawed, broken, traumatized, wounded, imperfect. It's finding that you are one with all of these places, because you that are finding you are one is the consciousness finding its oneness in purity and not in division and personal, finding its oneness with all that is. And the sense in this is that the sense in this is the sense of your heart opening. It feels like your heart opening. But what's really happening is your protection and defense mechanisms are falling away, and you're directly experiencing more of the true, wide, infinite heart, right? So it feels like my heart is opening, but it's really this protection and defense mechanism that's falling away, dissolving, being consumed in the transmutation process. And the sense of the heart opening to its wideness is this profound refinement into the recognition that you are one with all, that the orchestration of life is a divine one, and that everything and everyone in your whole life story has been the same flow of life. It's been the same divine orchestration. That every player is animated by the same Shakti, the same life. There's never been a victim and a perpetrator. There's never been any cause and effect. It's been one flow of life flowing within itself. And in your felt sense of the knowing of being the flow, this knowing is here, waiting to be remembered. And it is remembered through the transmutation of what feels unpalatable and indigestible. It's like digesting the indigestible, transmuting it from patterns of consciousness that are limited into the remembering of the unlimited flow of life, right? So we're speaking of this incredibly profound unity phase of refinement, of refining everything into the being, and how life is that refinement. And it's not a catastrophe when things are happening in life that feel challenging, intense. It's not because you're failing and you're not getting it. It's because you're ready to transmute these places. And the more that there can be a resting in the being and not being distracted away from the being by the story of failing and frustration and doubt and all of that story of limitation, because resting in the being is such an integral part of being able to hold a true, perfect presence and unconditional openness of love and true heart, in order for these places to be fully met and allowed and not turned away when they courageously surface from the shadowlands of the unconscious, suppressed nervous system, right? These old stresses in the nervous system come rising up to be released. And if we don't let them, they stay holding, stagnant, bobbing around, creating havoc. And we can hold them there by the mind, creating ideas and resistances. And so we really want to be able to invite everything to keep flowing, the releasing to happen. We want to be able to inquire deeply enough that we can inquire in a way that welcomes everything that's arising into the light, into the love, right? Now, if we just keep continuing the conversation of the mind that is essentially protection and distraction and about trying to prove that you're not what your core belief is holding. So the core belief, we could say, is holding an idea of lack, limitation, not enough, wounded, unlovable, abandoned, rejected, hurt, all of these limiting ideas. And if we remain in the conversation that believes that lack, the loss of innocence, violation, all of these kind of things, if we remain in that conversation, trying to prove I'm good enough, I'm lovable, I'm worthy, we're going to get lost in the mind conversation and the worldly ways of trying to prove something that doesn't need to be proven because you already are. When we stop that conversation, boom, stop that conversation, be aware of it, illuminate it. And now we have the possibility of actually starting to surface what's hidden in the nervous system, the old stresses. We have the ability to surface it without using practices and all of these techniques and ideas that we can somehow make a better me, that improve our self-worthy of God, that we just give all of that nonsense up and we just meet what is actually creating an obscuration, which is this energy protection, which is patterning in consciousness that's being held underneath the story of lack. So we have to come deeper to the way of experiencing the sense of lack, deeper than the mind story. We have to find it in the nervous system. So feeling the stress, the discordance in the nervous system is the means that we have to perceive, welcome and receive the stresses and release them, transmute them through the nervous system to the holiness and purity and remembering of innocence. And what that looks like in the life is a lot of old emotion moving through the nervous system. It looks like possibly anger, stress, hurt feelings, anxiety, trauma responses. It looks like all of this kind of stuff arising and being allowed to cry itself through, rage itself through, and be allowed, right? And it looks like asking for support if you feel that you can't hold yourself in that, right? Find the support and companionship. And as you all know, there's plenty here, right? To be able to courageously surface this material when it's ready to surface. Now, it has to only come forward when it's ready, because that's the kindness. That's the scientific intelligence, the true science, the true intelligence, right? It's not a mental science, it's an intelligence. It's the true yoga, to be perfectly honest. It's the true remembering of union, right? It's the remembering that brings everything to union, right? And it's so incredibly simple. It is in the resting here, the remembering, the recognition that everything is seen in the light. There's not a single practice of the mind's volition that can bring you to a deepening, but being here, aware of the mind and knowing yourself as the open, alive presence that is untouched, unwavered, undisturbed peace that is always still and silent, whatever is arising. This is the sanctuary, the truth of the being, and it serves as the presence of love, while everything that wants to arise for refinement comes forward. So it's to allow everything that arises, but not try to work with it in psychological functioning, not try to work with it with techniques, but to be here, so present with it. If there were a technique, it would be to release the wisdom of the narrative, to be able to be so present with what's happening that you can express. There's heat, there's a sense of contraction, it feels tight, there's sadness, there's releasing, right? It's like a narrative that is about narrating what is happening in direct experience in the body, right? It's to allow a simple narrating which releases the wisdom, What does this place want that is coming forward? To recognize that whatever is coming forward will always speak that it wants freedom, it wants to be released, it wants love, it wants to be held, and it only speaks this because it knows this truth, it remembers this truth, it remembers its wholeness, its longing for its own self, right? So anything and everything that comes forward, find out, what does it want? And it will tell you. It wants to come to the being, and it will tell you in its own language. So it's to allow the wisdom of the narrative, which is the direct experience of what's happening in the body, as an inquiry, but not the narrative of the mind that's spinning within its story. How to release the narrative, the wisdom of the narrative, is by allowing the wisdom of the body's holding patterns to express, right? So we're going to speak more and more about this so that there is the ability to move in this way, right? To allow what is arising, because this is so much of what is happening now, is that the process of refinement is getting richer, right? And as the process of refinement gets richer, we need to be able to hold the presence and inquiry that allows the releasing and deepening without getting lost in the mind's protections and defenses and habits, right? So everything that is speaking is supporting this unraveling, right? It's a profound and beautiful refinement, and everything that is speaking is speaking to the laws of nature that are in the process of refining and offering support in the unseen, in the consciousness itself. It's creating patterns that act as bridges for the holding patterns to be able to find a bridge and let go and use the bridge to release, right? So how that looks in the patterns of consciousness is like a mandala, filling in all of the intricate parts that are part of the whole and that are creating exactly the structures that are needed for these places that feel to be holding and stuck, to find exactly what is needed as a seeming bridge or guiding light or holding hands. Whatever is needed is being created in the flow of life to support everything that wants to come forward, to be able to come forward, right? And refine. So we don't ever need with the mind to work out, well, how or what. It's just to be the openness and everything is revealed, right? When we're resting in the being, everything is revealed. When we really are ready and we recognize that support is needed, support comes in, right? We don't ever have to be spending time in that sense of lack. That's the mind's idea. Now, when we're in that, it's really always just to bring the feelings forward. Once we meet the feelings, the play will adjust to bring in what is needed. Sometimes, of course, there are times where we're going to be in intense feelings, and we have to just be with whatever arises so that we can move through, find our way through, open through the patterns of consciousness that are protective, conditioned, until we open to find a spaciousness. But knowing the being is where there's a flow and a smoothness and a grace, always. It's where the flow and support of the pure openness of the flow of consciousness is always here. So, just being here. As the words come, it's never about understanding or doing anything. It's that the words are speaking to the laws of nature and moving in the unseen, the consciousness that needs to be moved. And the direct experience is to just recognize what is alive, what is stirred, what is opening, what is noticed, what is true. Who are you in this moment, here now? Who are you? What are you? Right? Just to be here. Just to be here in the naturalness. Simple, open, relaxed, at ease. Nothing is wanted from you by the glory. It is only the mind that creates wants, structures, strategies, intentions, timelines, deadlines, all of these kind of things. Nothing is asked of you because it's already here, right? This is the whole point. You're not in the process of becoming divine. You're in the process of remembering that you've always been divine. You're not in the process of becoming some kind of exalted creature. You're in the process of remembering that you're not the person that you imagine yourself to be, that you are already divine and whole. This is what is happening. This is what this life is for, right? It's completely the opposite of what the mind imagines. You have never become anything, and you never will become anything. You are the divine glory, radiant shining light, and you are whole and innocent and perfect. And it is just to rest here and allow the resonance of that which already knows this, that which is longing for this already knows it, to just be here and flow as a current of attraction to clear and move all of the obscurations so that the radiant shining glory that's already known can truly get to the surface of life. In a way, what it has to do is purify the nervous system, clear the contractions of the body that keep creating distraction and triggers, and shine on the surface of life as a nervous system that is not full of stress, but a nervous system that is full of divine remembrance, right? Full of Shakti, light, right? So in order for that light to get to the surface, it will move to push out all of the stresses, purify, transmute all of the stresses, so that the nervous system can be a resonant light, just radiating the love, the openness of true nature right on the surface of life. Right? This is what is happening now. In the unseen, however it's known or not known, it doesn't matter. This has nothing to do with the mind, nothing to do with my life and all the things the me thinks that my life is for. It's all happening naturally, all happening naturally. If there were any pointing, it is just to be here now in the naturalness of yourself and enjoy this moment, just simply being yourself, open and free, natural wholeness. To recognize that in the felt sense of being, there is no separation, there is no division, there is no personal, there is no limitation. And where this recognition is alive, this is the essence, nature, that is like the sanctuary that is here, holding the presence while everything that seems to be in forgetting remembers. Because the essential nature of everything is already this truth, and it's in a natural unraveling into remembering. The greatest offering is to be the presence, the light, the love, that is just this felt sense of being here now. It is the highest practice of all. It is the only technique that works, if we want to use those kind of terms, right? Yes, it is hard to rest here. And the mind can imagine, well, if I just do this, if I just do that. But be very aware of what practices are distractions and what practices bring a stress releasing, a balancing, a support, right? Because there are for sure practices that can happen every day that bring a support. Moving the body, stretching the body in different ways. Pranayama, breathing, can be very supportive. Sitting, right? There's many ways of supporting, but it is to know that the support is supporting the sense of what you are, to be able to be resting in presence. Resting in presence is what it's all pointing to, being able to rest, right? Moving through the layers of support until there can be a deep, direct resting in the being. Resting absorbed. And it doesn't mean that life doesn't go on. The resting absorbed is the knowing, just knowing the truth of who you are. Life goes on. Everything just moves in its own way, in its naturalness. The being never changes, and you are the being that never changes. So just resting here, just resting here, now, simple openness, being, simple being.